The city never sleeps, but in the shadows, something stirs. A man long thought dead is playing a dangerous game, and the stakes have never been higher. Jack Calloway walked away from the life once before, world of covert operations, untouchable enemies, and orders that left no room for morality. But when his family vanishes without a trace, he's dragged back into a war he never wanted. With every step, the lines between hunter and hunted blur. Old ghosts resurface. Betrayals cut deeper than bullets. And Jack soon realizes this isn't just about revenge, it's about survival. From the streets of New York to the jungles of Colombia, Jack will go to the ends of the earth to bring them home. But in a world where power is built on secrets and the past is never buried, one truth remains: not everyone makes it out alive. Welcome to Shadow Trade. The Nevada desert was a lonely place. Jack Calloway had chosen it for that reason. His house sat on a stretch of land where the nearest neighbor was miles away, where the only sounds at night were the wind against the cracked earth and the occasional coyote howling in the distance. It was a place where he could disappear, where the past couldn't find him. At least, that was the lie he told himself. Jack stood on his front porch, beer in hand, watching the horizon as the sun bled into the sand. His sharp blue-gray eyes scanned the empty road, the same way they had for years, out of habit. It didn't matter that he had been retired for 5 years. Some instincts never died. It was quiet, too quiet. Inside, everything was normal. Emily, his wife, was in the kitchen, humming softly as she stirred something on the stove. Their 8-year-old daughter Sophie sat at the table, eyes glued to her tablet, drawing pictures of some imaginary world in bright neon colors. Jack took a sip of beer and let out a slow breath. This was what he had fought for. This was why he left. But peace, he knew, never lasted long for men like him. 9:07 p.m. The phone rang. Jack's muscles tensed. No one called this late, not anymore. He walked to the landline hanging on the kitchen wall and picked up. Silence. Then, a voice. Distorted. Metallic. A voice run through a scrambler. "We have them." Jack's blood went cold. His grip on the phone tightened until his knuckles turned white. "Who the hell is this?" Static crackled, and then a familiar voice breaking through the interference. "Jack, don't trust Emily." The line cut dead. Jack froze. His breath caught in his chest, his mind already racing ahead, calculating, assessing. He spun toward the kitchen. The plate of food on the counter was still steaming. Sophie's tablet was still on the table, her latest drawing half finished. But they were gone. His pulse roared in his ears. He bolted through the house, checking each room. Empty. No broken glass, no forced entry, no sign of struggle. Whoever took them had been in and out like a ghost. Then he saw it. On the kitchen counter, next to Emily's untouched dinner plate, was a plain white envelope. Jack ripped it open. Inside was a single black card, 3 words printed in bold white letters: "Trade your life." Jack clenched his jaw so hard it ached. His hands trembled not with fear but with fury. Someone had just declared war. And Jack Calloway? He had spent his entire life preparing for war. Jack walked to his study. It was the only room in the house Emily wasn't allowed to enter, not because of secrecy, but because Jack didn't want his past to touch his family. Now, that past had taken them. His fingers skimmed across the bookshelf, stopping on a false spine among the dusty old novels. He pulled it free, revealing a hidden compartment. Inside sat a black case, untouched in years. Jack placed it on the desk, exhaling deeply before flipping it open. His Sig Sauer P-226 rested in its foam cutout, the same gun he had used for 15 years as a field operative for Horizon. Next to this passport, burner phones, stacks of old intel files. At the bottom of the case, hidden under a false panel, was a folded piece of paper. Jack hesitated before pulling it out. It was a letter. From Horizon. The last thing they ever sent him, 5 years ago when he walked away. The letter had one line: "No one leaves Jack." And now they had his family. His hands flexed over the pistol grip as he chambered around. His breathing slowed, his heartbeat steadied. The man he had buried 5 years ago, the killer, the shadow operative, was awake again. If they wanted to trade, Jack was more than willing to trade. But it wouldn't be his life. It would be theirs. Jack Calloway moved like a ghost through his own home, gathering everything he needed. His heart pounded in his chest, but his mind was clear, focused. There was no room for panic, only action. His wife and daughter had been taken. The people who did this wanted him. He checked his Sig Sauer P-226, ensuring it was loaded before sliding it into the holster at his back. He grabbed his knife, a military grade, black carbon steel, the same blade he had carried on hundreds of missions. His passport, a stack of burner phones, and an emergency cash supply went into a duffel bag. Then he opened the closet. Tucked beneath old clothes, inside a locked case, was his go bag, something he had prepared long ago but never wanted to use. Inside, a second Sig Sauer with 2 extra magazines, tactical gloves, a bulletproof vest light, flexible, meant for mobility, a comms device, encrypted, a USB drive labeled Horizon Contingency. Jack took everything. He left his house in silence, stepping into the night. His black Chevy Tahoe was parked outside, an unassuming vehicle but reinforced for off-grid travel. He slid into the driver's seat, started the engine, and sped off into the darkness. Jack's hands gripped the wheel as he pushed the Tahoe past 80 miles per hour, desert wind whipping past the windows. The lights of Las Vegas shimmered in the distance, but his mind wasn't on the city. It was on Horizon. For 15 years, he had been their weapon, an elite field operative, covert kills, black bag operations, missions no government could acknowledge. Then, 5 years ago, he left. He walked away, disappeared, but Horizon never let go of its people. And now, they had taken the only thing in the world that mattered to him. Jack inhaled deeply, forcing himself to stay in control. He had one advantage. They wanted him alive. That meant he had time, but not much. Las Vegas was alive, the neon glow washing over the streets as tourists and drunks stumbled between casinos. But Jack wasn't here to gamble. He pulled into a darkened alleyway, shutting off the engine. Ahead of him, nestled between a rundown pawn shop and an abandoned liquor store, was a strip club called the Black Rabbit. To most, it was just another sleazy Vegas dive. To Jack, it was a front for the information trade. If anyone in this city knew who took his family, it would be Marco Valeza, fixer, a broker, and a man with his hands in every criminal deal on the West Coast. Jack stepped out of the Tahoe, adjusting the pistol under his jacket. He walked toward the entrance, 2 bouncers eyeing him. Big guys, armed. One of them blocked his path. "Private party tonight," the bouncer said, crossing his arms. Jack didn't hesitate. He moved. His fist shot out, smashing into the bouncer's throat, not enough to kill, but enough to send him staggering. The second guard reached for his weapon, but Jack was faster. He grabbed the man's wrist, twisted, and drove his elbow into his face. The gun clattered to the ground. Jack stepped over them and pushed through the doors. Inside, music pounded, strobe lights flashing over half-dressed women and men in expensive suits. It smelled of liquor, sweat, and bad decisions. Jack didn't stop. He made his way to the VIP section where Marco Velez sat in a red leather booth, a drink in hand and 2 women on either side of him. Marco spotted Jack instantly. His face went pale. "Jack?" Marco blinked. "Jesus Christ, man! I thought you were dead!" Jack sat across from him, leaning in. "Where's my family?" Marco looked confused, then terrified. "What? What the hell are you talking about?" Jack grabbed him by the collar and yanked him forward. "Emily, Sophie, they're gone. Someone took them. And you're going to tell me who?" Marco shook his head. "Jack, I swear to you, I don't know anything about that." Jack's grip tightened. "Then find out. Fast." Marco gulped. Okay, I'll make some calls." Jack released him, and Marco scrambled for his phone. The tension was thick, the bass of the club rattling the table. Jack watched Marco dial a number. Then, something changed. Marco's face twisted. Fear. Real fear. He lowered the phone slowly and looked at Jack. "You need to get out of here," Marco whispered. Jack's eyes narrowed. "Why?" Marco swallowed hard. "Because they knew you were coming." Jack felt the shift in the air. The music was still loud, but something had changed. The back door of the club opened. Men in tactical gear stepped inside. Jack didn't think. He reacted. Gunfire erupted. Jack grabbed Marco and shoved him under the table. Bullets tore through the club. People screaming, running. Jack rolled left, firing 2 shots. One of the gunmen dropped. Another flanked him. Jack flipped the table, using it as cover, then popped a pwned shot, center mass. 2 down. More were coming. Jack grabbed Marco and hauled him toward the back exit. "Who the hell are these guys?" Marco yelled. Jack didn't answer. He already knew. Horizon. They weren't just watching. They were hunting. And Jack was done running. The night air smelled of burning rubber and gunpowder as Jack Calloway and Marco Velez sprinted through the back alleys of Las Vegas. Behind them, the wreckage of the Black Rabbit strip club was still settling bullet holes in the walls, bodies on the floor, the scent of spilled liquor mixing with blood. Jack had taken down 3 of the gunmen, but more had been closing in, forcing them to flee. Marco was panting, struggling to keep up. "Jack, Jesus, what the hell did you drag me into?" Jack didn't slow down. "You tell me. Who knew I was coming?" Marco wiped the sweat from his forehead, glancing around nervously. "I made a clone call. I thought I was being careful. But before I even got a full name out, the guy on the other end told me to forget it and hung up." Jack stopped in his tracks. "That wasn't normal. You said you had a name," Jack said, grabbing Marco's shoulder. Marco hesitated. "Yeah, but I don't like saying it out loud." Jack's patience was razor thin. "Say it!" Marco swallowed hard. "The guy who called the hit on you? The guy who took your family? I think it's Silas Kane." Jack's body tensed. That name was impossible. Silas Kane was dead. At least, that's what Jack had been told 10 years ago. Jack drove them out of the city, weaving through back roads until they reached an abandoned auto shop near Henderson. It had been one of his off-grid safe houses, a place he'd set up years ago when he first got out. He parked the Chevy Tahoe behind the building and motioned for Marco to follow. They entered through a rusted back door, moving past old tools and machinery until they reached a small office at the back. Jack flicked on a desk lamp. The warm glow illuminated a corkboard on the wall, covered in old documents and photos from his past life. Marco sat down, still shaken. What now? Jack ignored him, staring at the board. His mind raced through everything he knew about Silas Kane. 10 years ago, Kane had been a Ghostan assassin inside Horizon, one of their best. He was ruthless, surgical, the kind of man who didn't exist in official records. Jack had never met him in person, but he'd heard the stories. Then, one day, Kane had vanished. Horizon had sent out a memo. Operative Silas Kane terminated. But now, Marco was telling him Kane wasn't just alive. He had Jack's family. Jack clenched his jaw. "Where is he?" Marco exhaled. "That's the problem. Nobody knows. Kane disappeared. Years Agonaut, even Horizon could find him. But I've heard whispers. There's one guy who might know." Jack turned to him. "Who?" Marco hesitated. Then, "Bishop." Jack's eyes narrowed. That was another name he didn't want to hear. Bishop was a problem. A big problem. He had been one of Horizon's top cleaners, the kind of guy you called when an operation went sideways. If Kane was working under the radar, Bishop was the only person alive who might have contact with him. And the bad news? Bishop and Jack had unfinished business. The last time they saw each other, Jack had put 2 bullets in Bishop's leg and left him to die in a burning warehouse. Jack paced the small room. "Where is he?" Marco wiped a hand down his face. "Last I heard, he's been lying low in Los Angeles, running some kind of black market security firm. If he knows anything about Kane, you'll find him there." Jack nodded. That meant a 7-hour drive through the night. He could do it in 5 if he pushed it. But then Marco hesitated. "There's something else," he said, voice lower. "Jack, Kane isn't working alone." Jack stopped cold. "What do you mean?" Marco licked his lips. "I don't know all the details, but word is, Kane is running his own operation, knows some kind of private Black Ops unit independent of Horizon. And he's not just after you, Jack. He's after everyone who left." Jack's pulse slowed. Horizon never let anyone walk away. But Kane? He wasn't just hunting. He was cleaning house. Jack exhaled. "Then I'll have to get to him first." Marco shook his head. "Jack, listen to me. You can't go to war with this guy alone. You need..." A gunshot shattered the night. The window behind Marco exploded, glass flying inward. Marco dove to the floor, blood spraying the walls. Jack moved instantly, grabbing his gun and flipping the desk for cover. The bullet had come from outside, a sniper positioned somewhere across the lot. "Marco!" Jack grabbed him, shoulder wound, bleeding but alive. Marco gritted his teeth. "They found us." Another gunshot Jack ducked as a second bullet tore through the safe house door. No time to think. He grabbed Marco, hauled him onto his feet, and moved toward the back exit. Outside, shadows moved. At least 4 gunmen. Jack fired first. 1 down. He shoved Marco behind a stack of tires and ducked just as automatic fire ripped through the air. Jack grabbed a nearby metal pipe, hurled it toward the lot lights. The bulb exploded, plunging them into darkness. The moment the light was out, Jack moved. Silent. Fast. Deadly. The second shooter barely saw him coming. Jack gripped his wrist. Twisted snap. The gun fell. Jack grabbed it. Fired point blank. 2 down. A third attacker rushed him. Jack sidestepped, elbow to the throat, then drove his knee into the man's chest. He took the fallen gun and finished it. Only 1 left. Jack turned. The last gunman was already running. Jack raised the gun, but hesitated. Let him run. Let him take a message back. Jack Calloway wasn't dead. And he was coming. Jack patched Marco up as best he could, securing his wound before loading him into the Tahoe. Marco groaned. "You're insane." Jack smirked. "You're still breathing." Marco winced. "You're going after Bishop?" Jack started the engine. "Yeah." Marco sighed. "I hope you know what you're doing." Jack pulled out onto the highway, the Las Vegas lights shrinking behind them. He had 1 lead and 1 shot at getting ahead of Kane. He didn't have time to second-guess it. Jack Calloway drove through the endless black ribbon of highway, his mind locked in the kind of razor-sharp focus that came before war. The faint glow of Las Vegas had long since disappeared in his rearview mirror, swallowed by the desert. The road ahead stretched toward Los Angeles, a city where old ghosts waited for him. Beside him, Marco Velez groaned, shifting uncomfortably in the passenger seat. His shoulder was wrapped in a hastily applied bandage, but he was still bleeding. The man was tough, Jack. Gave him that, but he wasn't built for this kind of war. "You still alive?" Jack asked without looking over. Marco let out a dry chuckle, wincing. "Barely." He sucked in a breath. "Let me ask you something, Jack. When you retired, did you actually think they'd let you go?" Jack tightened his grip on the wheel. "I didn't think. I just left." Marco sighed, shaking his head. "Yeah, well, you know how these things go. You don't quit Horizon. They either kill you or make you disappear." Jack didn't respond. He had spent 5 years living under the illusion of peace, thinking he had outsmarted them. He should have known better. Marco glanced at him, his voice lowering. "Bishop isn't going to give you what you want for free." Jack smirked. "I wasn't planning on asking." They drove the rest of the way in silence. Los Angeles had a different kind of darkness than the desert. The city pulsed with a restless energy. Too many people, too many stories, too many criminals hiding in plain sight. The rich flaunted their power while the desperate fought for scraps in the shadows. Jack and Marco parked a few blocks away from a warehouse district near the docks. The area was abandoned this time of night, a place where no one asked questions, where bodies disappeared without a trace. Bishop's base of operations was an armored facility, heavily guarded. Jack studied the building from a rooftop across the street, watching the patrol routes of Bishop's men. There were at least 8 of them, all ex-military, fully armed. Marco leaned against a low wall, breathing heavily. "So, what's the plan, genius?" Jack checked his sidearm. "We go in quiet." Marco scoffed. "Yeah? And then what? Bishop isn't exactly the forgiving type. You did leave him to die." Jack chambered around. "Then we remind him why he's still breathing." They moved fast, silent. Years of training had honed Jack into something more than a soldier. He was a ghost, moving through the shadows like a predator. The first guard didn't even see him coming. Jack came from behind, wrapping an arm around the man's throat, squeezing just enough to cut off oxygen but not kill. The body dropped without a sound. Marco handled the second man. He wasn't as smooth as Jack, but a knife to the ribs got the job done. They pushed forward, weaving through crates and metal shipping containers. 2 more guards stood outside a reinforced door. Jack motioned for Marco to hold back. Jack approached without a word. The first guard turned too late. Jack's elbow crashed into his jaw, snapping his head sideways. Before the second could react, Jack drove his knee into the man's stomach, then slammed his face into the metal door. They were inside. The air smelled like oil, sweat, and blood. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting a sickly glow over the space. And sitting in a leather chair at the center of the room was Bishop. He looked different from the last time Jack saw him. His once pristine suit was gone, replaced by a military vest and tactical pants. His beard was thicker, his eyes darker. A man rebuilt by vengeance. He smiled. "Jack, you look like hell." Jack raised his gun. "And you look like a man with a death wish." Bishop chuckled, still as dramatic as ever. He gestured to the guards surrounding the room, at least 4 more men, all armed. "You sure you want to do this?" Jack didn't flinch. "I want information. You have it." Bishop exhaled, nodding slowly. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "This about your family?" Jack's eyes burned. "You already know the answer to that." Bishop nodded. "I do." He motioned for his men to stand down. "And I also know you're in over your head." Jack took a slow step forward. "Then start talking." Bishop studied him for a long moment. Then, finally, he sighed. "Jack, Silas Kane was never dead." The words hit like a bullet to the chest. Jack's mind raced. Horizon said he was terminated. Bishop smirked. "And you actually believed them?" He shook his head. "Kane wasn't killed. He was recruited. Horizon didn't let him go. They gave him resources. And now, he's got his own unit off the books. The things he's doing, even Horizon is afraid of him." Jack's jaw clenched. "Then tell me where he is." Bishop leaned back, shaking his head. "It's not that simple. Kane's operation is global. You want a name? You want a location? Fine. But it comes with a price." Jack narrowed his eyes. "What price?" Bishop's expression darkened. "You're not the only one being hunted, Jack. Horizon wants me dead too. I give you Kane. You get me out of this mess." Jack stared at him. "And if I say no?" Bishop's smirk returned. "Then you can kiss your wife and daughter goodbye?" Jack's finger hovered over the trigger. He should have shot Bishop where he sat. But he didn't. Because as much as he hated the bastard, he needed him. Jack exhaled. "Where do we start?" Bishop leaned forward. "First, we get the hell out of LA. Then, we go to Colombia." Jack frowned. "Why Colombia?" Bishop's eyes gleamed. "Because that's where Kane's next move is happening. And if we're lucky, we'll get to him before he gets to us." Jack said nothing. He holstered his gun and turned toward the door. Colombia. Jack had spent years avoiding the past. Now he was running straight into it. Jack Calloway never wanted to return to Colombia. Too many bodies, too many memories. For years, the country had been a battleground for black market deals, covert wars, and operations that never officially existed. Jack had spent enough time spilling blood in the jungles that he had vowed never to return. But now, Silas Kane had given him no choice. Jack drove through the winding roads of the Colombian countryside, his hands tight on the wheel of the rugged Jeep, as they neared their destination. The sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows across the vast jungle terrain. It was humid, thick with the scent of damp earth and diesel fuel. Bishop sat in the passenger seat, double-checking his weapons. "Still think this is a bad idea?" Jack muttered. Bishop snorted. "Oh, absolutely. But bad ideas seem to be your specialty." Jack didn't argue. This was suicide. They weren't just walking into enemy territory. They were walking into the heart of the Torres Sindicación of Colombia's deadliest cartels. The syndicate was rumored to have been funding Kane's private army, moving money, weapons, and men for his shadow operations. If Jack wanted to get closer to Kane, he had to start here. "What's the plan?" Bishop asked, pulling out a cigarette and lighting it. Jack exhaled, eyes scanning the road ahead. "We get inside, grab their weapons supplier, and make him talk." Bishop gave him a sideways look. "That's it? Just grab him?" Jack tested the edge of his combat knife. "More or less." Bishop smirked. "I missed this." The cartel compound sat on a hillside overlooking the jungle, a massive estate with high concrete walls, floodlights, and guard towers. Armed men patrolled the perimeter, some holding AK-47s, others carrying high-grade military rifles. Jack and Bishop parked a mile away, moving on foot through the dense foliage. Jack counted at least 15 guards outside, probably double that inside. Bishop let out a low whistle. "I assume you have a plan?" Jack pulled out a detonator and pressed a button. From the other side of the compound, a fuel truck exploded, sending fire and debris into the sky. Bishop grinned. "Ah, classic distraction." The guards panicked, running toward the blast. Jack and Bishop used the chaos to move fast, slipping through the back entrance. Inside, the compound was a fortress of drugs, money, and weapons. Crates of military-grade firearms lined the walls, and men in suits huddled over stacks of cash, counting shipments. Jack ignored them. They weren't the target. At the far end of the room, seated at a leather couch, sipping from a glass of whiskey, was Miguel Torres, the cartel's weapons supplier. And sitting across from him, dressed in a black suit, military stance, American was one of Kane's men. Jack's gut tightened. Bishop muttered, "That's not good." Jack didn't wait. He moved. 2 shots. The cartel guards dropped instantly. Miguel Torres barely had time to react before Jack was on him, yanking him up by his collar. Kane's man reached for his gun. Bishop put a bullet through his hand before he could fire. Miguel thrashed in Jack's grip. "Who the hell are you?" Jack slammed him against the table. The man asking the questions. Miguel gritted his teeth. "You just signed your death sentence, gringo." Jack pressed his knife against his throat. "That's funny. I was about to say the same thing." Miguel froze. Jack's voice was cold, measured. "Silas Kane, where is he?" Miguel hesitated, eyes darting toward the dying man in the suit. Jack didn't like hesitation. He drove the knife into the table next to Miguel's hand, the tip barely missing his skin. Miguel flinched. Okay. Kane's moving people assets, soldiers. He's setting up a facility outside of Medellin. That's all I know, I swear." Jack's mind raced. Kane wasn't just running operations. He was building something. Bishop swore under his breath. "He's gathering an army." Jack grabbed the dying man in the suit by his collar. The guy coughed blood, gasping. "Who are you?" Jack demanded. The man smiled. "You're too late." Jack fired. Miguel flinched violently, eyes wide. Jack turned back to him. "Congratulations. You're coming with us." Miguel's face drained of color. "Number no, if I help you, my brother will." Jack knocked him out cold. He turned to Bishop. "We're heading to Medellin." Bishop holstered his gun. "Great. Love Medellin. Real friendly place." Jack didn't smile. Something about this felt off. Kane was always 3 steps ahead, and Jack hated being behind. Jack Calloway had been in a lot of bad situations. Stranded behind enemy lines, hunted by foreign intelligence agencies, tortured in a Russian black site. But sneaking a cartel hostage onto a plane while an ex-government assassin hunted him down? That was new. Jack tightened his grip on the duffel bag of cash and weapons as he and Bishop moved through the crowded, dimly lit private airstrip outside Bogota. The hangar smelled like jet fuel, cigarette smoke, and desperation. Planes came and went at all hours, some carrying illegal cargo, others ferrying people who wanted to disappear. Miguel Torres, their cartel hostage, was handcuffed in the back seat of a stolen truck, his face bruised, his expensive suit now stained with blood. "You sure about this?" Bishop asked, checking his pistol. Jack exhaled, scanning the runway. "Not even a little." Bishop chuckled. "Good. Means we're on the right track." The plan was simple: get to Medellin before Kane moved his assets. But nothing about this mission was simple. Jack had contacts in Bogota's smugglers, mercenaries, people who owed him favors. He had arranged for a small cargo plane, something off the books, fast with no paper trail. The problem? Kane knew they were coming. And that meant every second counted. They drove onto the airstrip, stopping near a small twin-engine plane parked at the edge of the runway. The pilot, grizzled, one-eyed man named Hector Alvarez, stood by the open cargo door smoking a cigar. Hector grinned when he saw Jack. "You really know how to pick a bad time to visit, amigo." Jack smirked. "I always do." Hector flicked his cigar away and nodded toward Miguel in the back seat. "This him?" Jack pulled the cartel man out of the truck, shoving him toward the plane. Miguel stumbled but stayed quiet. He wasn't an idiot. "He better be worth it," Hector muttered. Jack didn't respond. Instead, he turned to Bishop. "Get in. We take off in 5. Bishop hesitated. "We expecting company?" Jack scanned the perimeter. The hangar workers, the fuel trucks, the men loitering near the plane's too many eyes watching them. Jack's gut told him they were already compromised. "We're not waiting to find out," Jack muttered. They loaded Miguel into the plane, handcuffing him to a metal support beam near the cargo hold. The cartel man glared but said nothing. Jack and Bishop strapped into their seats. Hector climbed into the cockpit, muttering in Spanish as he started the engines. The moment the plane lurched forward, Jack heard it. Gunfire. Bullets tore through the night, sparking against the metal frame of the aircraft. Jack spun. 5 black SUVs had stormed onto the airstrip, men pouring out, automatic rifles flashing. Bishop cursed. "They found us." Jack unbuckled, grabbed his rifle, and moved fast. "Return fire. Cover the pilot. Hold the plane." Hector roared from the cockpit. "I can't take off with bullets in my engine, Jack!" Jack ignored him, moving to the open cargo ramp. The gunmen were closing in, using the cover of crates and fuel barrels as they advanced. Jack fired first, dropping one. Bishop followed, taking out another. Miguel laughed. Jack turned, gun still aimed. "Something funny?" Miguel grinned. "You're already dead. You just don't know it yet." Jack slammed the rifle butt into Miguel's gut, shutting him up. He turned back to Bishop. "We need to move." Bishop nodded. "Yeah, no kidding." Jack grabbed a grenade from his vest, pulled the pin, and hurled it toward the SUVs. The blast rocked the airstrip, sending flames into the night. Gunmen dove for cover. Hector gunned the engines. "Get in or stay behind, amigo." Jack and Bishop leaped back onto the plane just as Hector pulled the aircraft onto the runway. The remaining gunmen kept firing, bullets pinging off the metal hull. Jack pulled the cargo door shut. Bishop exhaled. That was fun. Jack checked his ammo. That was just the beginning. The plane lifted into the sky, banking south toward Medellin. Jack sat against the cold metal floor, gun resting against his knee. Bishop leaned back, stretching. "All right, we made it. Now what?" Jack stared at Miguel, who was still handcuffed. "We make him talk." Miguel smirked. "You really think you scare me, gringo?" Jack didn't blink. "Number." He pulled a knife from his belt. "But I don't need you scared." Miguel's smirk disappeared. Jack crouched in front of him. "You're going to tell me everything about Kane's operations in Medellin." Miguel stayed silent. Jack flipped the knife in his hand, pressing the edge against Miguel's fingers. "I'll ask once." Miguel swallowed hard. Jack's voice darkened. Where's Kane? The plane touched down at a small private airstrip outside of Medellin, bouncing slightly on the uneven dirt runway. The jungle stretched for miles in every direction, dense, humid, and crawling with unseen threats. Jack Calloway didn't like it. He sat near the open cargo bay, staring out at the tree line, his mind already working through contingency plans. If Kane's men had tracked them this far, there was no doubt Medellin was already compromised. Beside him, Miguel Torres sat bound to a steel cargo support, his wrists cuffed, his expression unreadable. The cartel supplier had been stubborn so far, but Jack had ways of making men talk. Bishop unbuckled himself, stretching his arms. Remind me why we couldn't just kill this guy? Jack ignored him, standing. We need him alive. Kane used Torres' cartel to move weapons, men, and money. That means he knows Kane's next move. Bishop sighed. Fine. But if this turns into another gunfight, I'm blaming you. Hector, the pilot, stepped out of the cockpit, pulling off his headset. All right, amigos, this is where I leave you. He glanced at Miguel. I assume you want me to pretend I didn't see him? Jack smirked. That would be best. Hector nodded, grabbing his bag. Good luck, Calloway, you're gonna need it. Jack watched as Hector exited the plane, disappearing into the jungle. Then he turned to Miguel. Let's go. Miguel let out a slow breath, shaking his head. You're making a mistake, gringo. Jack crouched in front of him, his voice calm. No, Miguel. You made the mistake when you worked with Kane. Jack and Bishop dragged Miguel through a series of back roads and hidden jungle paths, avoiding major highways. Medellin was a city crawling with Kane's informants, cartel enforcers, and corrupt police. They couldn't afford to be seen. After 2 hours of hiking, they arrived at a safe house rundown, abandoned auto repair shop just outside the city. The building was stripped bare, but it had 4 walls, a roof, and most importantly, no surveillance. Bishop shut the doors behind them, locking the entrance. All right, let's get to work. Jack threw Miguel onto a chair, securing him with a second set of restraints. Miguel grinned, despite his situation. You don't scare me. Jack didn't respond. Instead, he pulled out his knife, testing the edge with his thumb. Miguel's grin faltered. Jack crouched in front of him. Tell me about Kane's operations in Medellin. Miguel's lips pressed together. I don't know anything. Jack exhaled. Then, without hesitation, he slammed the knife into the wooden table, just inches from Miguel's hand. Miguel flinched. Jack's voice was cold. That was your free pass. Next time, I won't miss. Miguel swallowed. All right. Kane is using Medellin as a staging ground. He's pulling in ex-military, assassins, corrupt officials. He's turning them into something bigger. Jack frowned. Bigger how? Miguel hesitated. He's not just hiring men. He's training them. He's building a unit outside of any government. A force that answers to no one. Bishop let out a low whistle. That's not good. Jack's mind worked fast. Kane had always been a strategist, a tactician. If he was gathering this much firepower, it meant only one thing: he was planning a war. Jack grabbed Miguel by the collar. Where's his base? Miguel shook his head. I don't know. He moves locations every few days. But I heard there's a facility in the jungle, east of the city. That's where he's holding his newest recruits. Jack met Bishop's gaze. Bishop sighed. Looks like we're going to the jungle. They moved fast, using an old dirt bike and a stolen truck. Jack and Bishop drove deep into the jungle. Miguel tied up in the back. The roads were barely passable muddy trails, thick foliage, dangerous turns, but after hours of travel, they reached a clearing. Jack pulled the truck to a stop. Ahead, barely visible through the trees, was Kane's jungle facility. A heavily fortified military compound sat in the middle of the rainforest, surrounded by watchtowers, security fences, and armed patrols. Bishop stared through his binoculars. Jesus, this place is a fortress. Jack wasn't surprised. Kane had planned for war. Bishop glanced at him. Tell me you have a plan. Jack loaded his rifle. Same as always. Bishop smirked. I was afraid of that. They moved in under the cover of darkness. slipping past the outer perimeter. Jack took out a lone guard with a knife, dragging the body into the shadows. Bishop silenced another with a pistol, both men working in perfect synchronization. Then they moved toward the main barracks. Inside, recruits trained under Kane's men, their movements precise, their discipline military grade. Jack's stomach twisted. This wasn't a cartel. This was an army. He grabbed Miguel by the shirt. Where would Kane be? Miguel hesitated. There's a command tent near the center of the base. Jack turned to Bishop. We go in quiet. If we find Kane, we take him. Bishop smirked. And if he fights back? Jack chambered around. Then we end it. They moved quickly, slipping through shadows and blind spots, taking down any guards in their path. But as they reached the command tent, something was wrong. Jack's instinct screamed at him. Too quiet, too easy. Then, gunfire. The jungle exploded in chaos. Kane's men had been waiting. Jack and Bishop dove for cover as bullets ripped through crates and metal structures. It's a trap, Bishop yelled. Jack fired back, dropping 2 gunmen, but more kept coming. Then, over the radio, a voice. Smooth, confident, familiar. Jack Calloway. I was wondering when you'd get here. Jack froze. Silas came. The voice continued. You've been chasing me for a long time, old friend. But now, it's my turn. Then an explosion. The world turned to fire. Darkness came first. Jack's mind felt sluggish, his body unresponsive. He fought to open his eyes, but they were leaden, his muscles refusing to obey. His breath was slow, uneven. Drugs. They had dosed him with something. Memories flickered like broken glass, the ambush in the jungle, gunfire cutting through the trees, Kane's voice crackling over the radio. The explosion had sent him flying, pain ripping through his ribs as he hit the ground. After that, nothing. A metallic clink echoed through the room, the cold bite of steel against his wrists, handcuffs. Jack forced his eyes open. He was in a concrete room, dimly lit by a single overhead bulb. The smell of damp air and gun oil filled his nostrils. Across from him, Bishop was slumped forward in a chair, his head tilted to the side, blood trickling down from a cut above his brow. He was still breathing, but unconscious. Jack flexed his fingers, testing the restraints. Too tight. The chair beneath him was bolted to the floor. No weapons, no exit in sight. Then the door opened. Silas Kane stepped inside. Jack had never met him face to face before, only seen his name in classified reports, heard his voice through intercepted communications. But now, standing in the doorway, Kane looked exactly as Jack had imagined in tall, lean, predator-like. His suit was perfectly tailored, his hair neatly combed back, but his eyes? Cold, calculating, dead. Kane smiled. Jack Calloway. It's been a long time. Jack met his gaze. Not long enough. Kane chuckled, stepping further into the room. He moved with precision, a man who was always in control. I have to admit, I wasn't sure you'd actually make it this far, but here you are. Impressive. Jack ignored the pleasantries. Where's my family? Kane tilted his head, pretending to think. Ah, yes. Emily and Sophie, lovely people. I can see why you care so much. He leaned against the metal table in the center of the room. Here's the thing. Jack, you're not in a position to ask questions. Jack clenched his jaw. His pulse remained steady, even as rage curled inside him. You want something. Otherwise, I'd already be dead. Kane smiled again, as if Jack had passed some kind of test. You always were the smart one. He straightened, pacing slightly. You see, Jack, I'm building something bigger than Horizon. Bigger than any government. Jack didn't react. He needed Kane to keep talking. Kane's eyes darkened. I learned a long time ago that the world doesn't belong to the powerful. It belongs to the ones willing to take it. He gestured around the room. That's what I'm doing. Taking it. Piece by piece. And I want you to be part of it. Jack exhaled through his nose. You already tried that sales pitch with Horizon. How'd that work out? Kane smirked. Horizon is weak. They still think governments run the world. They don't. Men like us do. He crouched in front of Jack, his voice lowering. Join me, Calloway, or watch everything you love burn. Jack stared at him. The threat wasn't subtle. Kane sighed. I'll give you time to think about it. He stood, straightening his cuffs. In the meantime, I have someone who wants to say hello. The door opened again. Two men entered, dragging someone between them. Miguel Torres. The cartel man was barely recognizable, his face swollen from a savage beating, his lips split, one eye swollen shut. They dumped him onto the floor, where he groaned, barely conscious. Kane turned back to Jack. I know Miguel helped you. That was a mistake. He pulled a silenced pistol from inside his jacket. And I don't like mistakes. Miguel's breathing was ragged. He tried to lift his head, but the effort was weak. Kane stepped closer, placing the barrel of the gun against Miguel's forehead. Jack knew what was coming. Kane. The gunshot was quiet but final. Miguel's body slumped forward, blood pooling beneath him. Jack forced himself to remain still. Show no reaction. Kane wanted him rattled. He wouldn't give him the satisfaction. Kane holstered the pistol. That was a demonstration. Next time, it'll be your wife. Or your daughter. Jack's hands curled into fists beneath the restraints. Kane checked his watch. I'll give you 12 hours to make a decision. Join me, or lose everything. He turned, walking toward the door. Think carefully, Jack. The door slammed shut behind him. Jack took a slow breath. His mind was already working through a plan. 12 hours? He'd be out in 2. Jack Calloway sat motionless, his breathing controlled, his mind already breaking down the room. The restraints, the guards outside, the lock on the door, everything was a piece of the puzzle. Across from him, Bishop stirred, groaning as he blinked through the haze of whatever drug they had pumped into them. Blood caked his forehead, and his hands were zip-tied behind his chair. Jack tested the strength of his cuffs again. Steel, industrial grade, bolted to the chair. Not impossible, but it would take time. Time he didn't have. Bishop let out a raspy chuckle. Well, that could have gone better. Jack didn't respond. His focus was on the screw in the chair's armrest, slightly loose. Kane had made a mistake. Jack twisted his wrist, slowly maneuvering the metal cuff back and forth, loosening the bolt. It was slow, painful, but his hands were free in just under 2 minutes. Bishop's head lolled slightly. I'd ask how the hell you did that, but I really don't care right now. Jack leaned over, pulling a small, hidden blade from inside his boot. They had searched him, but not well enough. He cut through Bishop's restraints. Bishop exhaled. That's why I keep you around. Jack stood, moving to the door, pressing his ear against it. Footsteps outside, 2 guards. Armed. The problem was the LACA, reinforced security panel. No way to pick it. Jack moved to Miguel's body. His shirt was soaked with blood, his face frozen in an expression of shock. Jack searched his pockets. A knife. A key card. Bishop watched him. You thinking what I'm thinking? Jack nodded. We're not waiting for Kane's 12-hour deadline. Bishop cracked his neck. Good, because I really don't feel like dying today. Jack slid the key card into the lock. A soft beep, then the click of the door unlocking. The guards outside never stood a chance. Jack moved first. He grabbed the nearest one, twisting his rifle away, slamming his elbow into the man's throat. The second turned, reaching for his sidearm. But Bishop put him down with a swift, bone-crunching kick to the knee, followed by a quick, silenced shot to the head. Jack stripped the first guard of his rifle and sidearm, tossing a pistol to Bishop. Bishop caught it. We're making a habit of this. Jack didn't smile. Let's go. They stepped into the hallway, moving fast. The compound was vast-thigh security, military grade. Concrete walls, surveillance cameras, reinforced doors. They needed to get out before the alarm went off. Jack spotted an emergency exit map on the wall. The facility had a hangar on the south side. If they could make it there, they might find transportation out. A voice crackled over the intercom. Kane's voice. Jack, you disappoint me. Jack didn't slow his pace. I give you an opportunity to be part of something greater. And what do? You run. Again. Bishop scowled. I really hate this guy. Jack stayed silent, moving through a corridor, avoiding security patrols. They needed weapons, explosives, if possible. Kane's voice continued. Since you've made your decision, I suppose I don't need your family anymore. Jack stopped. Bishop stiffened. Jack. Jack whipped around, firing a burst of bullets into the nearest security camera. Kane laughed softly over the intercom. Ah, there's the Jack Calloway I remember. Jack took a breath, forcing himself to focus. Losing control wouldn't get Emily and Sophie back. He reloaded. We move now. They continued through the corridors, taking down 2 more guards in close quarters, before reaching a weapons cashier storage room filled with rifles, grenades, and armor. Bishop whistled. Jackpot. Jack grabbed a vest, loading up. He strapped an explosive charge to his belt. They weren't just escaping. They were destroying this place. They moved toward the hangar, guns ready. The moment they entered, bullets tore through the air. Guards opened fire from high platforms, behind crates, near aircraft. A full-on firefight. Jack and Bishop dived for cover, returning fire. Jack took down 2 men near a fueling station, while Bishop flanked left, putting a bullet through a sniper's scope. A helicopter sat in the center of the hangar, their way out. Jack hurled a grenade, taking out 3 more hostiles. They sprinted for the aircraft. Bishop jumped into the pilot's seat. You do know, I've only flown one of these once, right? Jack fired another burst at incoming guards. Now's a good time to learn. Bishop flicked switches, starting the rotors. The hangar doors began to close. Kane was trying to trap them. Jack set the explosive charge, a final gift. Then, a shot rang out. Jack felt the burn of a bullet slicing his side, forcing him to stumble into the helicopter. Bishop pulled him in, lifting off. Jack grabbed his rifle, firing downward as Kane's men scrambled to stop them. The helicopter cleared the doors. Jack pressed the detonator. The entire facility erupted into flames. They flew into the night, the burning jungle below them. Bishop glanced over. You good? Jack exhaled, pressing a hand against his wound. Fine. Bishop smirked. You sure? You look like hell. Jack didn't smile. He looked out at the horizon. This wasn't over. Not even close. Kane was still out there, and his family was still in danger. Jack chambered a fresh round. Kane made a mistake. Bishop raised an eyebrow. What's that? Jack's eyes burned. He didn't kill me when he had the chance. The helicopter cut through the night sky, blades slicing the humid Colombian air. Below them, the jungle burned, the remnants of Kane's secret facility reduced to a smoldering inferno. Jack Calloway pressed a hand against his side, the gunshot wound stinging, but not deep enough to slow him down. He'd had worse. Bishop kept one hand on the controls, eyes scanning the sky. We need a place to land. This thing isn't exactly fuel efficient. Jack wiped the blood from his palm and refocused. There's a private airstrip near Cartagena. One of my old contacts runs it. If we're lucky, we can get a plane out before Kane locks down the region. Bishop smirked. Lucky hasn't really been our thing lately. Jack pulled out a burner phone and dialed a number from memory. After 2 rings, a voice answered. Jack Calloway. Thought you were dead. Jack didn't waste time. Not yet. I need a plane out of Colombia, fast. A pause. Then, Cartagena airstrip. 2 hours. Bring cash. The line went dead. Jack slid the phone back into his pocket. We have a way out. Bishop nodded, banking the helicopter toward the northwest coast. The jungle below gave way to open fields, rivers, and dirt roads leading toward civilization. Jack reloaded his rifle, his mind already on the next move. Kane wasn't just playing defense anymore. He had the power, the reach, and the manpower to strike anywhere, anytime. If Jack wanted his family back, he needed to stop reacting. He needed to hunt. The helicopter dropped low, skimming over the coastline as Cartagena came into view, a city of old Spanish architecture, neon-lit nightlife, and dark alleys where men like Jack thrived. Bishop took them down near the private airstrip, a hidden runway carved into the jungle, lined with cargo planes and smugglers moving illegal goods. As soon as they touched down, Jack and Bishop jumped out, weapons in hand. They needed to move fast. Jack scanned the dimly lit airstrip, spotting a group of men near a small twin-engine aircraft. One of them turned, stepping forward. Felix Ruiz. Jack had worked with him before, pilot, fixer, and someone who valued money over loyalty. Ruiz grinned. Calloway. You always show up when things are about to get messy. Jack tossed him a duffel bag full of cash. That's for the plane. No questions, no records. Ruiz checked the bag, nodding in approval. You got it. He gestured toward the aircraft. Full tank. Flight plan is off the books. Where to? Jack hesitated. He didn't have a location yet. Kane was always 3 steps ahead, staying off-grid, moving like a ghost. But Jack had one lead left. He turned to Bishop. London. Bishop raised an eyebrow. That's a hell of a leap. Jack's jaw tightened. Not if you know Kane. Ruiz shrugged. Whatever you say, amigo, plane's yours. Jack stepped toward the aircraft, but a nagging feeling itched at the back of his mind. Too easy. Then he heard the low growl of an approaching engine. Bishop cursed. We've got company. Jack turned. 3 black SUVs tore down the dirt road toward the airstrip. Kane's men. Jack didn't hesitate. He lifted his rifle and fired the first shot. Bishop did the same, covering the left flank. The SUVs skidded to a stop, doors flying open as mercenaries poured out, weapons flashing. Jack dove behind a stack of cargo crates as bullets ripped through the air. Ruiz scrambled for cover, shouting, "This was not part of the deal!" Jack ignored him, returning fire. He took down 2 men near the lead vehicle. Bishop dropped another, sending the mercenary sprawling into the dirt. One of the SUVs revved forward, trying to block the runway. Jack reached for a grenade, pulled the pin. He threw it. The explosion ripped through the vehicle, sending flames skyward. Bishop grabbed Ruiz by the collar. Start the damn plane! Ruiz, panicking, scrambled into the cockpit, flipping switches. The engines roared to life. Jack and Bishop moved, firing as they ran toward the open cargo door. Another wave of gunmen emerged from the jungle. Jack turned, emptying his magazine, covering Bishop as he climbed in. The gunfire was relentless. Thina sharp pain. Jack stumbled, his vision blurring for a second. A bullet grazed his leg. Bishop grabbed him, yanking him inside as the plane lurched forward. The last thing Jack saw before the cargo door slammed shut was the burning wreckage of the SUVs, Kane's men scrambling in the chaos. Then, they were airborne. Jack sat against the metal floor, pressing a hand against his bleeding leg. Bishop leaned against the wall, breathing hard. Well, that was fun. Jack exhaled. They had won this round. But Kane wasn't done. Bishop shook his head. London, huh? Jack nodded. Bishop sighed. You mind telling me what's waiting for us there? Jack's voice was quiet. The one person Kane still fears. The private plane cut through the night sky, leaving the burning jungles of Colombia far behind. Inside the dimly lit cabin, Jack Calloway sat near the window, watching the clouds shift in the moonlight. His leg throbbed from the gunshot graze, but the pain barely registered. His mind was already in London on the next move. Bishop sat across from him, flipping a knife between his fingers, eyes half-lidded in exhaustion. They had barely slept in days. All right, Bishop muttered, voice hoarse from the smoke of the last battle. Who the hell are we meeting in London? Jack exhaled, rubbing his temples. Someone I hoped I'd never see again. Bishop arched an eyebrow. That sounds promising. Jack didn't answer immediately. Instead, he reached into his jacket, pulling out a small, worn-out photograph. It was creased at the edges, faded with time. In the image, 3 men stood together in military gear, rifles slung over their backs, the ruins of an old compound behind them. Jack was on the left, Kane was on the right, and in the middle was the only man Jack ever truly feared. Bishop leaned forward, squinting. Who's that? Jack's jaw tightened. Elias Voss. The name felt heavy in the air, like speaking it out loud might bring something dark with it. Bishop let out a low whistle. No way! I thought he was dead. So did I, Jack muttered. Voss wasn't just a name. He was a legend. A former Black Ops tactician, he had been Kane's superior before disappearing years ago, burned by the same people who tried to erase Jack. If anyone knew how to stop Kane, it was him. The problem? Voss didn't want to be found. Jack leaned back in his seat, closing his eyes. We land in 4 hours. Get some rest. Bishop scoffed. Yeah, sure. I'll sleep when I'm dead. Jack didn't respond. He was already thinking about how deep the rabbit hole went. The plane touched down at a private airstrip outside of London just before dawn. Cold mist hung low over the ground, swirling around the city lights in the distance. Jack and Bishop stepped onto the tarmac, the crisp air biting against their skin. A black Range Rover waited at the edge of the runway, engine idling. Jack recognized the driver instantly, Declan Shaw, an old MI6 operative turned fixer. Shaw had been a useful ally in the past, but he was also someone who only worked for the highest bidder. Jack slid into the back seat without a word. Bishop followed. Shaw glanced at them in the rearview mirror, his British accent smooth as ever. You boys look like hell. Jack ignored him. You have the location? Shaw pulled away from the airstrip, merging onto the deserted morning streets of London. Voss is buried deep, but not deep enough. He's been off-grid for almost a decade, but I found a trace. Bishop yawned. Let me guess somewhere nice? Shaw smirked. Quite the opposite. Underground club in East London. Private, invite only. A place where ghosts drink together. Jack adjusted the pistol under his jacket. When? Shaw turned onto a dark alley. Tonight. Jack nodded. That gave them time to prepare. Shaw parked outside a rundown hotel, handing Jack a small burner phone. You get one shot at this. Voss doesn't take kindly to unannounced guests. Jack pocketed the phone. He'll listen. Shaw didn't look convinced. And if he doesn't? Jack's eyes were cold. Then we make him. The club was hidden beneath an abandoned warehouse, accessible only through a secured steel door guarded by ex-military types. Jack and Bishop walked through the entrance without hesitation, weapons hidden, eyes sharp. Inside, the air was thick with cigar smoke and whiskey fumes, low lighting casting shadows over men who didn't belong in normal society. Former mercenaries, rogue agents, killers without a country. At the back of the room, seated alone at a circular table, was Elias Voss. His silver hair was cropped short, his face weathered but unreadable, his posture casual yet tense. Jack approached, stopping a few feet away. Voss didn't look up. Instead, he swirled his whiskey in his glass. Jack Calloway. Jack didn't blink. Elias. Voss sighed, finally meeting his gaze. His blue eyes were sharp, assessing. Took you long enough. Jack pulled out a chair, sitting across from him. You knew I was coming? Voss smirked. You set half of Columbia on fire. Of course I knew. Bishop sat beside Jack, arms crossed. So what's the play here, old man? You help us, or we start making noise? Voss chuckled. The only noise you'll make is the sound of your bones breaking. Jack leaned forward. I don't have time for games. Kane has my family. Voss's smirk faded. He sat back, exhaling slowly. Silas Kane. Jack nodded. Voss studied him for a long moment. Then he reached into his coat, pulling out a small flash drive. He slid it across the table. Jack picked it up, his mind racing. Voss's voice was quiet. That contains everything on Kane. His movements, his private network, his safe houses. It's all there. Jack clenched his jaw. Why? Voss took another sip of whiskey. Because Kane isn't just planning a war, Jack. He's already started it. Bishop frowned. What the hell does that mean? Voss's voice dropped lower. Kane has an investor. Someone pulling the strings from the shadows. The money, the resources, the global reach. It's not just him. Jack's stomach twisted. Who? Voss hesitated. Then he muttered one name. Jack felt his entire body go still. Bishop cursed under his breath. Jack exhaled. You're lying. Voss's expression didn't change. I wish I was. Jack gripped the table, his pulse pounding. Because the name Voss had just spoken was someone Jack had trusted, someone he had worked with for years, someone who should have been dead. Jack leaned back, his mind racing. Everything was about to change. Jack Calloway sat in stunned silence, gripping the flash drive that Voss had slid across the table. The name he had just heard felt like a bullet to the chest, a wound deeper than any he had taken in battle. Bishop exhaled sharply, his fingers tapping against the table. "Tell me that's a mistake." Voss didn't flinch. "It's not." Jack clenched his jaw. "I watched him die." Voss finally leaned forward, folding his hands. "Then you should have checked for a pulse." The name on Voss's lips still echoed in Jack's head. David Rains. Once, David had been Jack's closest ally. They had fought side by side in the darkest corners of the world, men without names, executing missions that no government could acknowledge. Then, on a mission gone wrong, David was killed in an ambush. At least, that's what Jack had believed. His body was never recovered. Now, years later, he was alive. And he was the one funding Kane's war. Jack exhaled slowly, his grip tightening on the flash drive. "Why?" Voss sighed, swirling the last of his whiskey. "You already know the answer. Power. Control. Horizon was never enough for him. He wanted something bigger, something that outlasted governments and agencies." Bishop let out a low laugh, shaking his head. "Jesus, we were looking for a warlord, and instead, we find a ghost." Jack's mind spun through every mission, every operation, every conversation he had ever had with David. The betrayal cut deep, but he couldn't afford to let it cloud his thinking. He pushed down the rage. "Where is he?" Voss exhaled. "That's where things get complicated. Rains is off the grid, but he's planning something. A final play." Jack frowned. "Final play?" Voss leaned forward, his voice lowering. "A targeted strike. Something big enough to make governments kneel." Jack's gut twisted. "Where?" Voss hesitated. Then he muttered two words. "New York." Jack felt his blood turn to ice. New York was one of the most secure cities in the world. If Rains was planning something there, it meant one thing: he was done hiding. Bishop let out a low whistle. "Well, that's subtle." Jack shoved the flash drive into his pocket, already standing. "We leave tonight." Voss tilted his head. "And what exactly is your plan?" Jack's voice was calm. "Cold. We stop him." Voss smirked. "Just like that?" Jack met his gaze. "Just like that." Voss chuckled, shaking his head. "I've missed your arrogance, Calloway." Then he stood, grabbing his coat. "I'll help you get to New York, but after that, you're on your own." Jack nodded. That was fine by him. This wasn't just about Kane anymore. This was personal. The next few hours moved fast. Jack, Bishop, and Voss traveled through back channels, securing false passports, weapons, and a private flight out of London. They couldn't use commercial airlines not, with Kane and Rains watching every move. At a safe house in the outskirts of the city, Jack sat at a small desk, staring at the flash drive. Bishop sat across from him, arms folded. "So what's the angle?" Jack plugged the drive into a secured laptop, watching as dozens of encrypted files flashed across the screen. Blueprints, financial transactions, weapons shipments, all leading to one central location in New York. Jack's eyes narrowed. "This isn't just a hit. It's an operation." Bishop frowned. "Meaning?" Jack tapped the screen. "They're moving something. High-level personnel. Secure assets. This isn't just about destruction. They're taking control." Bishop exhaled. "And we're the only ones who know." Jack closed the laptop. "Then we stopped them." New York City loomed like a fortress of steel and glass, the skyline glowing under the winter moonlight. The plane touched down at a private airstrip outside the city, its arrival unnoticed, unregistered. Jack, Bishop, and Voss stepped onto the tarmac, the cold air biting at their skin. Voss adjusted his coat, glancing at Jack. "I assume you have contacts here?" Jack nodded. "Someone who owes me a favor." Bishop smirked. "Oh, this should be good." Jack didn't waste time. He pulled out a burner phone, dialing a number. The line rang once, twice. Then, A voice. I was wondering when you'd call. Jack smirked. We need to talk, Nyla. The woman on the other end sighed heavily. This better be good. Jack's smirk faded. It's worse than good. It's world-ending. A pause. Then, same place as last time. 1 hour. The line went dead. Bishop arched an eyebrow. Who's Nyla? Jack started walking. She used to run Horizon's Cyber Ops division. If anyone can track Reigns in the city, it's her. Voss adjusted his gloves. And if she won't help? Jack's voice was firm. She will. Bishop chuckled. You sound confident. Jack's eyes darkened. Because she hates Reigns more than I do. 1 hour later, they sat inside a dimly lit bar in Lower Manhattan, a place that catered to ex-agents, criminals, and people looking to disappear. Jack sat at the back booth, his fingers tapping against the table. Then, the door opened. Nyla Vasquez walked in, her leather coat billowing slightly, her sharp eyes scanning the room. She moved like someone who had spent years looking over her shoulder. She slid into the booth across from Jack. You really know how to make a mess, Calloway. Jack smirked. Good to see you too. She rolled her eyes. You're here about Reigns. Jack nodded. She leaned forward. Then you need to listen carefully, because you don't have much time. Jack's jaw tightened. What's he planning? Nyla exhaled. It's already moving, Jack. Reigns isn't setting up an attack. Jack frowned. Then what? Her next words made his stomach drop. He's taking the city. Bishop blinked. Come again? Nyla pulled out a tablet, sliding it across the table. Jack looked down, eyes scanning the hacked security footage of high-ranking officials, corporate CEOs, and defense contractors entering a private location. A location Jack recognized instantly. A high-security bunker beneath the city. Jack's fingers tightened around the tablet. Voss exhaled. Reigns isn't just attacking, he's making a coup. Jack's stomach churned. He wasn't too late, but he was damn close. Bishop leaned forward. So what do we do? Jack didn't hesitate. We go underground. He pushed the tablet back to Nyla. And we finish this. Jack Calloway had seen war in every form. In the deserts of the Middle East, in the frozen wastelands of Siberia, in the jungles of South America. But this was something else. New York City was alive above the millions of people going about their lives, unaware that beneath their feet, a silent war was brewing. Jack, Bishop, Voss, and Nyla stood inside a darkened subway maintenance tunnel, deep beneath Lower Manhattan. The smell of metal, damp concrete, and old electricity filled the air. A single service light flickered overhead, casting long shadows against the walls. Nyla adjusted the tablet in her hands, scanning the hacked security feeds. Reigns and his people are inside the Hudson bunker, about a mile from here. Security is Heavy X, military, Horizon defectors, and Kane's private mercenaries. Jack checked his rifle, his voice cold. How do we get in? Nyla tapped the screen. There's a hidden service entrance along the old subway lines, not marked on any city maps. It was built for covert government access during the Cold War. She looked up. We use that. We get in undetected. Bishop smirked. You make it sound easy. Voss exhaled. It won't be. Jack slung his rifle over his shoulder. Doesn't matter. No more running. No more hiding. This was the end game. Jack led the way, moving through the narrow tunnels, his senses sharp, every step measured. They had one shot at this. If they failed, Reigns would lock down the bunker, and his coup would be unstoppable. The tunnel walls were covered in old graffiti, rusted pipes running along the ceiling. The deeper they went, the colder the air became, the silence pressing down like a weight. Then, ahead a steel maintenance door, secured with a keypad lock. Nyla stepped forward, working fast. Give me 30 seconds. Jack turned to Voss and Bishop. Weapons hot. Bishop grinned. Thought you'd never ask. The lock clicked open. Nyla stepped back. We're in. Jack pushed the door open, rifle raised. Beyond it, a dark, cavernous corridor leading to hell. The Hudson bunker was unlike anything Jack had ever seen. Built as a secret Cold War fallback site, it had been abandoned by the government decades ago. Now, Rains had turned it into his own fortress. The halls were lined with state-of-the-art security, biometric scanners, and patrolling guards armed with military-grade weapons. Jack led them forward, keeping to the shadows, his heartbeat steady. Then movement ahead. 2 guards patrolling the main corridor. Jack signaled. Silent takedown. Bishop flanked left, Voss right. In perfect synchronization, both men took their targets down, muffling the bodies as they hit the floor. Jack stepped over them, motioning for Nyla to move forward. "Where's the control room?" Nyla pulled up the schematics. "Northwest sector, 2nd floor." Jack nodded. "That's where we go." They moved fast, bypassing security checkpoints, weaving through hallways filled with crates of weapons and communication servers. Then, ahead voices. Jack pressed against the wall, peering around the corner. A glass-walled conference room. And inside, Silas Kane and David Rains. Jack's pulse slowed. Kane stood at the head of a long table, his calm arrogance radiating through the room. Rains, however, was different. He was sharper than Jack remembered, his presence more commanding. They weren't just plotting, they were leading. And the room wasn't empty. Half a dozen high-ranking officials sat around the table, some military, some corporate, some political. This wasn't just a coup. This was a new world order being built in real time. Jack exhaled. "We end this now." Bishop checked his rifle. "You want quiet or loud?" Jack's jaw tightened. Loud. The glass exploded inward as Jack and his team breached the room. Gunfire ripped through the air, men diving for cover, alarms blaring through the facility. Kane and Rains moved instantly, disappearing through a secured exit. Jack took out 2 guards, advancing forward as chaos erupted. Bishop and Voss covered the flanks, keeping the other hostiles pinned down. Nyla's voice crackled over comms. "Security lockdown initiated! You've got 3 minutes before they seal the exits!" Jack moved. He broke into a sprint, tearing through the side door just in time to see Kane and Rains vanishing down an escape corridor. Jack raised his rifle. Too late. A blast door slammed shut between them. Jack cursed under his breath, his breathing hard. Then, Kane's voice crackled over the intercom. Predictable as always, Calloway. Jack clenched his jaw. "You're running out of places to hide, Kane." Kane chuckled. "Am I?" Jack exhaled slowly. He turned to see Bishop and Voss clearing the rest of the room, securing weapons, disabling cameras. Nyla's voice came back. "They're escaping through an underground train tunnel. If you don't move now, you lose them." Jack didn't hesitate. "Then we move." The chase was on. Jack, Bishop, and Voss moved through the lower levels of the bunker, pushing past storage areas, reaching a massive underground railway tunnel. Ahead, the dim glow of a departing train. Jack didn't slow down. They ran, their boots pounding against the metal tracks, bullets flying past them as Kane's remaining men tried to slow them down. Jack lifted his rifle, took out 2 shooters, and kept running. The train was picking up speed. Jack pushed harder. 5 feet. 4. 3. He lunged and caught the edge of the last car. Bishop grabbed on right after him, pulling himself inside. Voss was behind them, barely making the jump, landing hard as the train rattled through the tunnel. Jack rolled onto his feet, breathing hard. He turned to Bishop. "We end this. Now." Bishop grinned, cracking his knuckles. "Damn right." Jack chambered his rifle, advancing toward the front of the train. Kane and Rains were waiting. And this time, Jack wasn't letting them get away. The train roared through the underground tunnel, steel wheels grinding against the tracks as it picked up speed. The air inside was thick with tension, the rhythmic clatter of the rails the only sound as Jack Calloway pushed himself forward, rifle raised, muscles coiled for the fight ahead. Bishop moved beside him, checking his sidearm, while Voss took the rear, watching their flank. The entire train was a battlefield waiting to ignite. Somewhere ahead, beyond these steel walls, Kane and Rains were running out of track. Jack didn't intend to let them reach the end. He pressed forward, clearing the first car empty except for abandoned crates and flickering overhead lights. The second car was a different story. The moment Jack stepped through the sliding door, bullets shredded the air. He dove to the floor, rolling behind a row of overturned seats as rounds ripped through the walls. Bishop followed, ducking for cover, while Voss moved with deadly precision, taking out two of Kane's men with single silenced shots. Jack gritted his teeth, pressing his back against the metal seat. The train swayed violently as it rushed through the tunnel, the force nearly knocking him off balance. He exhaled sharply, gripping his rifle tighter. Bishop called out from the other side, breathless. "Any ideas?" Jack peeked out, catching a glimpse of 4 more hostiles blocking the passage ahead. Too many angles, too many guns pointed their way. The fight had to be quick and brutal. Jack's fingers found the flashbang grenade on his vest. He yanked the pin, waited a beat, and hurled it forward. A sharp, concussive blast filled the car, followed by shouts of confusion. Jack moved. He surged forward, rifle kicking against his shoulder as he cut down the remaining men, their bodies slumping before they could recover. Bishop swept in behind him, finishing off the last target. Jack didn't stop to breathe. He shoved through the next door, into the third train car, where more figures waited in the dim light. This time, there was no gunfire. Instead, standing in the middle of the car, waiting for them like a hunter in the dark, was Silas Kane. His suit was slightly wrinkled, his usual composure untouched. Even now, even after everything. His gun rested loosely in his grip, like he had all the time in the world. Jack didn't hesitate. He raised his rifle. Kane moved first. He pivoted sideways, impossibly fast, firing once. The shot grazed Jack's shoulder, forcing him back. Kane kept moving, closing the distance, shoving Jack's rifle away before driving a knee into his ribs. Jack grunted, twisting his body, throwing a sharp elbow into Kane's side. The fight was vicious, calculated. Kane wasn't just an operative, was a killer honed by years in the shadows, just like Jack. They slammed into the walls of the moving train, trading brutal blows. Jack's vision blurred as Kane's fist connected with his jaw, sending him staggering. He barely had time to recover before Kane was on him again, gripping his throat, shoving him against the steel wall. Kane's voice was smooth, controlled. "You never knew when to quit, Calloway." Jack gritted his teeth, grabbing Kane's wrist and twisting sharply. Kane hissed in pain as Jack wrenched his arm, using the moment to throw a devastating punch to his ribs. Kane stumbled back, but he was still smiling, even through the pain. "Doesn't matter," he muttered. "It's already done." Jack's stomach twisted. "What are you talking about?" Kane exhaled, wiping blood from his lip. "Rains is gone." Jack froze. Bishop burst into the car, gun raised. "Where the hell is he?" Kane only grinned. Jack didn't hesitate. He lunged forward, grabbing Kane by the collar and slamming him against the train door. "Where is he?" Kane chuckled softly, shaking his head. "You're always too late, Calloway." Jack's fingers tightened. He could end it right here, snap Kane's neck, leave him broken, but it wouldn't bring back his family. Bishop stepped closer. "Jack." Jack didn't move. His heartbeat pounded in his ears. He wanted Kane to suffer, but Kane wasn't the real enemy. Jack exhaled sharply and released him, stepping back. Kane smirked. "That's why you'll always lose." Jack lifted his gun and pulled the trigger. The bullet hit Kane's kneecap, sending him collapsing to the floor with a strangled scream. Jack stared down at him, voice low. "Not this time." The train jerked violently, throwing them off balance. Bishop grabbed a handle for support. "We have to go. Now." Jack didn't spare Kane another glance. He turned, pushing through the next door, moving toward the final train car. The moment he stepped inside, the emergency exit at the back of the train was open, wind howling through the space. Rains was gone. Jack gritted his teeth. Bishop cursed. He jumped. Jack's eyes followed the distant glow of a helicopter vanishing into the city skyline. Rains had escaped. Jack clenched his jaw. This wasn't over. Not yet. The helicopter's blinking lights vanished into the New York skyline, swallowed by the vast city beyond. Jack Calloway stood at the open rear door of the train, the wind whipping against his face, the cold air biting at his bruised skin, his fingers clenched into fists. David Rains had escaped, but not for long. Jack turned away, stepping back into the train, where Bishop was crouched over Silas Kane, who lay against the steel floor, clutching his shattered kneecap. Blood pooled around him, his face pale from the pain, but still, somehow, he managed to smile. Jack approached slowly, his boots heavy against the floor. "You had your chance," he said, voice cold. Kane chuckled through gritted teeth. "And you think you've won?" Jack didn't answer. Kane's eyes flickered with something amusement, maybe even admiration. "You're still thinking like a soldier, Calloway. But Rains? He's thinking bigger. He's not running. He's finishing what he started." Jack's jaw tightened. Bishop exhaled. "Jack, we have to move. The second the authorities connect this wreck to us, we're screwed." Jack stared at Kane for a long moment, then finally stood. "Find him," Kane muttered. "See what it changes." Jack didn't hesitate. He pulled the trigger. The suppressed round struck Kane in the forehead, snapping his head back against the floor, the smirk still frozen on his lips. Jack holstered his gun. "It changes everything," Bishop exhaled. "You could have let him rot." Jack shook his head. Kane never rotted. He would have found a way back. No more loose ends. The two of them climbed up the train ladder, emerging onto the roof as the city lights rushed past below them. Ahead, they could see the subway tunnel opening, the tracks leading toward a maintenance bridge just beyond the city's core. Jack glanced at Bishop. "Time to jump." Bishop gave him a dry look. "I hate this part." Jack smirked slightly, then leaped. They hit the gravel rooftop of a nearby warehouse just as the train shot out of the tunnel, continuing into the night. Bishop rolled onto his back, groaning. "You really need a retirement plan." Jack was already on his feet, eyes scanning the city. He wasn't thinking about rest. He was thinking about Rains. Bishop pushed himself up. "We have no leads." Jack pulled out the burner phone Nyla had given him earlier. "We will." He dialed. The phone rang once before Nyla answered. "I saw the footage," she said immediately. "Rains is moving fast. He's using a private airstrip outside the city. If you go now, you might still catch him." Jack's grip on the phone tightened. "Where?" She gave him the address. Jack ended the call. He turned to Bishop. "Let's go." The black Range Rover tore down the empty highway, the engine growling as Jack pushed it past 80 miles per hour. The private airstrip loomed in the distance, its floodlights glowing in the night like a beacon. Jack could already see it, the jet waiting on the runway, its engines humming. Rains was seconds from leaving. Jack didn't slow down. Bishop braced himself. "Jack!" Jack slammed the brakes. The vehicle skidded, tires screeching against the pavement as he yanked the wheel, spinning the SUV sideways, blocking the runway access. The moment the car stopped, Jack and Bishop were already out, weapons raised. The jet's door opened, and Rains stepped out. Dressed in his usual black tactical suit, he moved calmly down the staircase, his expression unreadable. Behind him, 3 heavily armed guards flanked his every step. Jack took a step forward. "This ends here, Rains." Rains sighed, shaking his head. "You never could see the bigger picture, Jack." Jack didn't blink. "The bigger picture? You mean killing innocent people for control?" Rains smirked. "Innocence is an illusion. Power is the only truth." He gestured around them. "Look at where we are. Out of the shadows. No more false governments. No more hidden agendas. Only strength." Jack tightened his grip on his pistol. "You think you're untouchable?" Jack asked. Rains' smirk faded. "I think I'm inevitable." Jack fired first. The bullet tore through the air, aimed straight for Rains' chest. One of the guards lunged, taking the shot instead. Chaos erupted. Bishop fired, dropping another guard, while Jack surged forward, using the distraction to close the gap. Rains moved fast, twisting away, drawing his own weapon. Jack dodged left, slamming into him, sending them both crashing onto the tarmac. The gun clattered away. Jack and Rains hit the ground hard, rolling, fists already swinging. Rains threw a sharp elbow, catching Jack in the ribs. Jack retaliated, driving his knee into Rains' side, shoving him backward. They both scrambled up, circling each other. Jack wiped the blood from his lip. "You had a chance to stay dead." Rains smirked. "I was never meant to die." Jack lunged. They collided, fists cracking against bone, both men trained, lethal, relentless. Rains swung wide. Jack dodged, countering with a brutal punch to his gut, making him stagger. Jack moved to finish it, but Rains was fast. He grabbed a discarded pistol from the ground and aimed. Jack didn't think. He moved. The gunshot echoed through the night. Rains froze, his eyes widening. Jack's knife was buried in his chest, right between the ribs. Rains coughed, blood bubbling at his lips. His grip on the pistol weakened, shaking. Jack stepped closer, gripping the hilt. "This time," Jack said quietly, "I checked for a pulse." With a swift motion, he yanked the knife free. Rains collapsed, his body hitting the ground hard, his breath shallow. Jack stood over him, watching as the light faded from his eyes. It was over. Finally, Bishop approached, exhaling. "You good?" Jack nodded once. He looked up at the jets still idling on the runway. "Find them." Bishop climbed the stairs, moving inside. Moments later, he called out, "Jack." Jack turned, and then he saw them. Emily! Sophie! His wife and daughter stepped onto the stairs, eyes wide, disbelief written all over their faces. Jack's breath caught. Emily whispered, "Jack?" He moved before he could think, closing the distance, pulling them into his arms. Sophie sobbed against his chest. Emily clung to him, whispering his name over and over again. Jack held them both, letting the weight of everything finally sink in. It was over. The war, the hunt, the ghosts of the past. Rains was dead, Kane was gone. And Jack Calloway? He was finally going home,